I'm thrilled right now to turn it over to Representative Sylleste Davis. Welcome, Sylleste.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Over the next hour, I would like for you to think about what you'll be in the future, what you're going to do, where you're going to go to school, what title you might have. So I will pose this question to you, and that is that you don't know where a STEM education could lead you. And I would say that I'm a good example of that, and I'll tell you why. I graduated from college with a math degree. I'd always loved math, and frankly, that was an easy thing for me to do, and I thought that it created a lot of job opportunities for me. So I majored in math. When I graduated, I became employed by a local electric utility, and I was a programmer. And for you, those of you out there that would love to be programmers, I can understand because I have a love for programming as well. So I started out as a programmer, and I worked in applications programming and systems programming, which was operating systems, networks, data, all kinds of things. And I ended my career actually working with contracts, which was definitely different, but fun nonetheless. Well, after that career, I decided that I was going to run for public office because I felt the desire and the need to give back to my community. So I became, and I was elected to become a member of the South Carolina House of Representatives. And that's a place that I never realized that I would end up. And let me just tell you, with my STEM degree and my STEM background, I've been able to do a lot of things here in the state of South Carolina to help improve and to promote STEM education in the state of South Carolina. As you know, this month is STEM Education Month. And I will say that we started out with STEM Education Day, and I worked with Dr. Tom Peters with the South Carolina Coalition of Math and Science to do that. And then he took off with it, and it has grown since then. I will also mention a piece of legislation that we worked on this year, and that passed the House of Representatives. It also has to pass the Senate. So if you want to encourage your senator to do so, to pass that, I think that would be great. But what it does is it requires a computer programming class from middle school all the way through high school. So as you can hear, my phone's ringing in the background, maybe. Those things happen when we're on Zoom. And I will add also that the pandemic has also highlighted the need for STEM education and for those in science and technology. Because we're now Zooming more, right? And we're doing telehealth, and there's lots of other things that the pandemic has shown to us, and that fits right in with the STEM education. So I wish for all of you the very best in your future, and I hope you all are STEM majors and you have wonderful careers.
Great. Thank you so much, Sylleste. I think earlier we were talking about, you talked about the pandemic. I mean, I think it would be great, like from your vantage point as a state legislator. And of course, I think one of the things we're trying to drive home here is that you can get a STEM background, but then you have so many options as to what your career would look like in terms of what you're doing right now. And so we want to make sure that, kids understand that just because you get a STEM background doesn't mean you couldn't be a career person in the legislature as well. So tell us a little bit about, from your vantage point, what careers you've seen really highlighted through the pandemic as a leader for the state of South Carolina.
Well, I mean, as you know, the pandemic has been quite a challenge for the country and for the world, quite frankly. And it's been a challenge for the scientists in trying to better understand the virus, the scientists that are developing the vaccine, the drug manufacturing companies to try to figure out how to most quickly and efficiently create and produce these vaccines. It's been an issue of logistics and how do we quickly move materials, move vaccines throughout the country in a most efficient manner. All of that is based on engineering. I mean, we've had situations, for example, with Zoom, right? Zoom is technology based, and online learning, you know, obviously is technology based, and that's played a big role in how we've handled the virus and how we're going to recover from the virus. We've also put an extra emphasis on telehealth, and telehealth is where you combine medicine with IT, and you talk or converse, communicate with a doctor over your computer. And so we've seen a big move towards that. So really this pandemic has been one of the most perfect examples I've seen of how all of these STEM careers and these STEM majors and all of this knowledge comes together to attack a worldwide issue.
I mean, I think that's a great example that probably will go in some history books and maybe some science books in the future. But, you know, thank you for sharing it. And thank you for what you're doing for South Carolina. And I definitely also want to give a shout out to Dr. Tom Peters, who has been just an incredible leader for the state of South Carolina in STEM and running the STEM coalition. And of course, to your great governor, McMaster, for his leadership in STEM as well, and Superintendent Molly Spearman as well. You've got a lot of great leaders in the state that are really proposing and promoting more STEM education type resources. Angel Malone as well with the CTE department. So keep up the great work. And I know we have people from different states on here, and I know that a lot of states are really focused on STEM and education right now, given the pandemic. So thanks again for joining us today. Yeah, it's our pleasure. So next we're going to transition over to our panel that are going to be wonderful ladies that you are going to get to meet and get to know a little bit, that are really living the talk, and not just talking about girls in STEM or women in STEM or STEM in general, but they are actually in great careers with that. So I'd love to start out by Kirby, if we can go ahead and get our panel on the screen for us right now. And first off, we're going to introduce Latia Gary. Latia is actually she is an engineer who is an electrical engineer with an MBA as well. So she has that business aspect and electrical engineering background. And she also is the chair of MWM Mentors in the state of South Carolina. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Additionally, we are joined by Dr. Tamara Warren. Tamara has an incredible background as well, being an environmental scientist, which I'm an environmental engineer, so I'm a sister with you in that. But also, you know, is a professor and working with the University of South Carolina. So again, you know, mixing STEM with teaching, you know, again, just giving so many opportunities here. You guys are going to get to hear about great careers, because, you know, when I was a kid, I always grew up thinking I wanted to be a teacher. And, you know, again, the STEM background gave me the opportunity to follow up any path that I chose. And so I think that's what's so powerful about your story as well. And last but certainly not least, Emily Coleman, who works for a large aerospace manufacturer. You can guess, maybe one that you might have gotten on a plane before. They're a great proponent of STEM education. I know them well. And but she also is in computer science. And so, you know, while we might talk about engineering, a lot of people sometimes see computer science as being a little different from engineering. I'm kind of the opinion they both go together. You know, you have to have some tech skills in either of them. So that is where we are. So I'd love to kick it off first hearing from Latia, because I'd love her to share a little bit more about MWM Mentors and the work in South Carolina that she has been engaged in. So Latia.
Good morning, afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for calling in. I want to add that Emily is also a board member for South Carolina MWM Mentors. Basically, we're an organization that support and facilitates the mentoring of young girls and women in STEM fields and pursuing those fields and staying in those fields. We know that statistically, some of us get into the field, a small number of us that get in, but we don't necessarily stay in the long term. And so we want to support that effort in keeping us in STEM, because we add value. We add value to the organizations, and our insights and our knowledge it's uncomparable to anyone else. So that's what Million Women Mentors South Carolina is about. We also have, we facilitate a few events. We have one going on right now between high school students and college students and STEM fields. And so we're allowing the facilitation of the conversation of what to expect when you go to college, especially today, because I graduated almost 20 years ago. The world is not the same. The college experience is not the same, and I can't speak to it the same way someone that's in it right now can. So that's why we have college students, and we've gathered a few that are great young women and that are doing great things in STEM, and they can share their experience, and we can obtain best practices and learn lessons learned from each other. And so it's basically mentoring college students, mentoring high school students as they prepare for college.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Latia, because you know that important work around, you know, helping the next generation get onto these career pathways is really what Million Mentors is about. It's a lot what Learning Blade's about. It's a lot what we're talking about today. So it's inspiring to have so many people at the table to help move the needle on this. So, so I'd love to start off by letting each of you tell a little bit about your work, a little bit about yourself too. And then, you know, I do want to remind people, if you do have questions that you would like us to ask the panel toward the end of this session, please type them in the chat box. I'm not going to promise we can get to all of them, but I'd love to, we're going to pull some good ones hopefully out and be able to ask them the question. So I'd love to start with you, Tamara, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and kind of what got you on this pathway.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can you see me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're fine.
Hopefully you can see, I drew the picture. So you were asked to draw what does a scientist look like? Here is my picture. So I am a scientist, an educator, and an engineer. So a little about myself. My name is Dr. Tamara Warren, but please feel free to call me Tamara. I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan. So I've been down here in Columbia, South Carolina, going on 13 years. I am currently a senior environmental scientist with a company called Whitetail Environmental. And so we have employees that are at military installations or military bases across the country. So being here in Columbia, South Carolina, I am at Fort Jackson, which is the largest basic training installation in the United States. And so I won't get into those operations, but I do environmental work for the environmental work for the Army. I am also an adjunct professor with the University of South Carolina. So I have the opportunity to teach environmentally related subject matters, such as environmental science, natural history, marine science, even environmental management with undergraduate students. So I have the opportunity to share the things that I do in my professional career with the military as well as other organizations and give that perspective to new students. Now, in my previous life, I was actually an environmental engineer with General Motors. And so I was in the automotive industry, again, making sure the facilities and the organization itself was being environmentally conscious or moving towards sustainability. So I've had this different career paths for the last 20 years. But what I will say is when I started out in thinking about what I would be when I grow up, I always knew I had an interest in the environment, but honestly, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so my career path has taken a drastic leap, but we'll discuss later how I started from wanting to save dogs and cats and any other type of animals into how I'm doing my environmental work now.
Very cool. Very cool. And I mean, neat to think, you know, our path is never straight. It's always got its little twists and turns. And I think that's really even more evident today. So, so next, Emily, if you can share a little bit about your path and how you and what you are all about now today.
Absolutely. So as you said, I work for a large aerospace manufacturer in Charleston, South Carolina. Today, I do mobile application development and website development for them internally. So we have a lot of mechanics and engineers who need a lot of really specialized, complicated software. And it's my job to make things that might take up paper and time and resources and a lot of manual work easier for them. And this isn't something that we could just buy off the shelf. This isn't a product that Google could just hand us, because no one else in the world is doing the work that we're doing in the way that we do it. So it's my job to help speed up things like manufacturing and quality checks to make sure that all of the safety nets work together all the time, and that we can always go back and trace, for example, that every bolt on the plane was turned the right number of times to the right degree, that kind of thing. So it's really, I get to see so many cool things at my job, and I get to solve problems for real people, and I get to go meet the people whose problems I'm solving, which is my absolute favorite part of my job. And I got into computer science not because I loved it out of the gate. I was an English kid. English was my favorite class. I loved to read. Math made me cry every night of middle school. I was okay with math. Math and I could be friends, but it was a contentious relationship. It's not my first love. Science was okay. But I've always really loved actually figuring things out and thinking through problems. I really liked logic problems and abstract things. So when it came time for college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't think I wanted to go into English because writing kind of stressed me out, and I had no idea. And my dad, who's in IT, said, well, there are some scholarships in computer science. You should just give it a try. And I said, okay, I'll drop out after the first year. And I took my first programming class and I liked it. So I kept doing it. And then I got far enough into my degree where I got to solve my first problem for someone. And I loved that. I worked on this geochronology software for scientists in Australia, where you could like visualize how old rocks were. And I was pretty bad at it. It was my first ever big software project, but I loved being able to talk to a person and figure out what they needed, and then work really hard and figure something out. And then their life was easier. Like they could go in a few days and start using the thing I had made. And I was hooked after that. So after I graduated, I got a job with my current company, and I've been there ever since.
Wonderful. And I mean, I totally get you, like math. Some people don't like math, or they think they're not good at math. I always loved math, which was kind of weird. I am a nerd and I'm proud of it. But my daughter, actually, when she was in middle school, it's the same thing. She hated math, mainly because I was trying to teach her, which I'm sure some of you, your moms or dads, try to teach you, right? And it doesn't go very well. And as soon as one of her teachers said, you know what, let me help her with her math, she took off and learned math. And then now she became an engineer as well. So I think, you know, to remind people, just because you don't like math right now, just hold on. It may click one day for you, and it just goes. What you talked about, Emily, I think is so important for kids to know, you know, that you really, sometimes we don't understand how good we are at things until we kind of just let it go a little bit and then figure out, hey, we actually like this. You like the programming, you know, so great. So Latia, can you also share a little bit about your work and a little bit about you personally and your path?
Sure. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I've been in Columbia now for 8 years. Actually, I knew Tamara before coming down here, and I actually reached out to her and say, hey, I'm coming down. So it was nice to know someone that was here, because she was the only person I knew. So like I said, I came down in 2012, about 8 years ago. And my career started in automotive. I went to General Motors Engineering Institute, and I received my electrical engineering degree from there. So my career started in automotive. I met Tamara at General Motors in Mansfield, Ohio. That's where we met and kicked off. And so I started off as electrical engineering, doing programming, right? Ladder logic for different machines and equipment that we have. And I always tended to also help in quality. So I also work as a quality engineer a lot of times. So that has a lot to do with regulations. I've worked in very heavily regulated industries with the automotive and manufacturing industry, as well as now what brought me to South Carolina, which is the energy sector. So I'm currently with Southern Nuclear, which is in Georgia, but I started with the energy sector with Westinghouse. I started with Westinghouse Electric Company in the Pittsburgh area, and I had responsibilities that were located here in South Carolina with VC Summer, as well as Georgia and China. And I decided I needed to change. So I pretty much convinced my management that I can better serve my projects by being located in Columbia. So I convinced them that I could better serve their projects by being closer to the site and actually being on the floor. So that had to do with my manufacturing experience, right? Because I'm used to seeing stuff being done. So being in Pittsburgh, where I'm mostly in meetings and doing everything on computer and just talking to everyone at the site, I decided I wanted to see the action. I wanted to see the plants being built. So this was my first stint in construction. So that's what brought me to South Carolina, and I've enjoyed it to the fact that even though VC Summer has shut down, unfortunately, I'm still here. I decided to stay in South Carolina because I like the people that I met here. I believe that I've built or met a very good network here, and I felt that the opportunity for what's next for me can start here, can be developed in Columbia. So to tell you really quick, I believe in adding value, and in both electrical engineering and quality engineering, I have added value to the organizations that I've worked with. So in quality realm, like I said, there's a lot of holding individuals and organizations to the regulations and the contract requirements, but there's also statistical analysis in there, which I love part of because it's that problem solving that I absolutely love to do. But the problem solving that I enjoy is based on statistics. It's based on the data and allowing the data to lead us to the root cause and actually get a solid fix in place to prevent, for the energy sector, life and death situations that can completely shut us down, as well as in the automotive. You guys are, we're driving cars every day. Even during a pandemic, you might just go for a drive. So there are certain regulations in that realm that we have to meet as well. And, just as with Emily, with the aerospace field, there's very small room for error. So we need to get products out. And fortunately, I've been able to work in those types of organizations.
Great. So I think you heard like a variety of stories from our panelists. And, I think, again, it's important to note, everybody has their own path. So I'm going to abandon some of the questions that we have because we're getting some really great ones from the kids, and I'd love for you all to be able to answer those. So let's start off first. Students want to know, what's the hardest part about being an engineer? So maybe we'll start with Emily. We'll start with you.
The hardest part of being an engineer for me is definitely communication. Communicating between our customers, the people who will be using what we're trying to build, to the business who approves what we're going to build, to us who's going to build it. We want to have a fluent conversation between all of those people so everyone knows what's happening and for us to be on the same page. And we have people all over the world across all time zones trying to cooperate on this kind of thing. So communication of being completely sure that we're building the right thing and being sure that people will know how to use it once we build it are definitely by far the hardest parts of my job. Once we get to the technical part, I can Google anything. I can work with some very smart people on my team and figure out anything. But if we don't build the right thing in the first place, then it's all for nothing.
Yep, for sure, for sure. So what about you, Tamara? What is the hardest part about being an engineer for you?
I will say one of the hardest things about being an engineer, and I've actually added this in the chat, is really relating to your peers or your workers. And that has specifically been the case with me being environmental. So for example, working either at the military installation or within an automotive field, sometimes they may not understand exactly why you're there or what you're doing. So with me being an environmental engineer, it's like, well, why do we have to recycle? Why can't we only use these certain type of products? This DW40 versus something else. And so I know the technology behind it or the technicalities behind it, but not necessarily everyone else. And so how can you relate to a workforce where this isn't their subject matter expert? And so really trying to make it simple or break it down so we can all be on the same page. Because at the end of the day, we want the organization to be successful. We want the workers to be able to do what they're supposed to do on a daily basis. And I want to be able to make sure that the organization is in compliance or doing what it needs to do. And so really getting on the same page, not belittling people or not making it so they can't understand, but know that these are the things that you're supposed to do so we can essentially have a job that is open. So there's multiple things that can be challenging, but that's one of the biggest when you're working with individuals who aren't in the same area as you.
Yeah. How about you, Latia? What do you think's the hardest part?
For me, I would say the most challenging part for me is building your reputation. And I say that because it is a male-dominated field, and being that, say, in automotive, for instance, I started managing or supervising people that were, gotta say, 20, 30, 40 years older than me. They don't want to listen to you, right? Because you, and I've been told this, you're younger than my kid. So they may not want to listen to you, but it is building your reputation by knowing what you're speaking about, having the facts, and being credible. And so for me, I've done those things, right? So I say if I'm at GM, I've done that. So everyone knows me, everyone knows my reputation. So therefore, I'm a credible source. But guess what? The automotive industry took up one of those cycles that it goes through, and I had to move on to another company. So guess what I have to do again? My resume speaks for itself. Sometimes when people see you, they still don't necessarily expect the resume. So I may have to go through that process again of proving myself once again. And it's very necessary. And that's why I said this may be a challenge, because because sometimes there may be an admin that still thinks I'm a recent graduate. And I'm like, no, praying for a couple more strands of gray hair. I'm not. And so it's like proving that knowledge base. And again, it's a male-dominated field. So we're in a conference room and everyone's looking for Gary. I'm right here. They don't realize that is me, because I may be the only woman at the table. I may be the only person of color at the table. So unfortunately, due to our different biases, much may not be expected. So it's up to me to open my mouth, right, in a way that adds value to the conversation, whereas they are now coming to me looking for my input. So while that is rewarding, it's still challenging when you have to do that and you come to different circles or different groups. But it's necessary, and it's not hard. Once you do it, you'll do it again and again. And it's, for me, I don't mind at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true. I actually had, obviously some opportunities as well, working as a woman engineer, probably long before any of you three. And, being only one of two engineering girls in my class, I definitely did that. But I also want to say, college was tough. There's no question about it. And, I think what you find is like, you might be good at one subject, part of an engineering course that you're taking, but you're not good at something else. So like, you need to understand that that's okay. And I think, a lot of times kids that are really smart in school, like you've made all A's all your life, and you go to college and, oh my gosh, you're going to make a B now, or maybe even a C, but you're going to live through it, because it isn't about, making the perfect grades. It's really about learning. And so I always encourage, young people, when you're thinking about this, don't think you've got to be perfect, because you don't. And I think that's what's great about engineering. You know, the only reason we have great inventions is because we failed before, right? It's not because the first time that somebody built the plane, it just immediately took off. As Orville and Wilbur Wright, they didn't go. So, you know, you have to make sure that you understand you can make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. I think what it's not okay to do, in my mind, is quit after you make the mistake. You make the mistake, but you get up again, like Latia just talked about. You know, maybe people didn't realize who she was when she started, but it didn't keep her down. It made her continue to rise up. So I think that's really an important thing. And school will be hard. It's not easy. But, you know, a lot of things like Emily was talking about, maybe she didn't want to do writing. Writing came hard for her, but maybe it's easy for you. But we also want to remind you, just because you write well doesn't mean you can't think about a STEM career. I love a French teacher that I met in Arkansas, and she is now the best computer science teacher in the state of Arkansas, because she said, you know what, I was teaching French, and that's a language. Now I'm teaching computer science. That's a language too. So you can think about ways that you can kind of, you know, be in this. So we're getting a lot of questions. I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of them. They're amazing. We're going to catalog some of these and get our panelists and others to talk about it. But we did have a question about a couple of things I think that would be interesting for you all to talk about. And one is certainly around, you know, if you were giving yourself as an elementary or a middle school kid some advice, what would that be? What would you tell yourself when you're in middle school and high school that really is kind of where you see you are today? So I think maybe we'll start with Latia first this time, not so you won't have to go last every time. So move it around a little bit. And Latia, if you can just share quickly a little bit about what you might tell your middle school or high school self.
Sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. I can be stubborn. And even still today, I can be stubborn. So I decided when I was younger, when I was in elementary school, junior high, once I figured out what I wanted to do, that's all I knew. I never thought about anything else. I decided then during science projects, I realized it was electrical, realized what an engineer was. That was it. That was it. And so I wish that I would have opened myself up to more possibilities. And because I'm from Ohio, because I'm from the Midwest, automotive manufacturing is what I was surrounded by in that area, right? And where there were multiple companies. So I wish I would have opened myself up to maybe the Southeast region and what was going on there, or the Northwest, just being more exposure to different fields and what I could possibly do would have been good. For me, I know I don't like blood and guts, so a doctor wouldn't have worked for me. It wouldn't have worked at all. But who knows, there's another field or another area that may have interested me if I would have been open to the opportunity.
Great, great. So how about you, Tamara?
I'm sorry, I was in the chat. So can you ask the question again?
Certainly. Just what advice would you give your middle school or high school self?
I would definitely say whatever your passion is, go with that passion, because it can, or whatever interests you, because it can definitely take you to different heights or different paths. Kind of relating back to what we were discussing before, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian when I grew up, until I realized that I would have to euthanize dogs or put dogs to sleep. And that just, I knew I could not do that for the rest of my life. I also like art. So someone in the chat said that they want to be an artist when they grow up. And so I thought about being a graphics designer. But there was something that was always in me about wanting to be in the environment or do something in the environment. But I just didn't know what it was. And similar to Latia's story, growing up in Detroit, being in the Midwest in the late 80s, early 90s, when engineering was really taking off, and that was the career to go into because you could be guaranteed a good job either in the automotive industry or other areas, I figured, well, I would go the route of engineering. Although my interest was in the environment, somehow I made it fit in. And I think this is going to be very important for some of you, although you're a few years away from going into college. I think this will resonate the closer you get either into high school or there. when I did undergrad at Michigan State University, I had to take a pre-engineering course, and I had a wonderful professor. Her name was Dr. Eurylis Wiggins. She was African-American PhD. She was over the diversity program in the College of Engineering. And it was an introduction to engineering just to get our feet wet on what to expect for the next 4 to 5 years. And in one of her classes, she said to all of us, she said, look to your left, look to your right, even look forward or backwards. And more than likely, 2 or 3 of these individuals you will not graduate with. And so it made me think, not in a negative way that I would not graduate, but for me, it made me realize that engineering, now this is, even though we're talking about STEM, engineering may not have been exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something more in line with the environment in another area. And lo and behold, I did not graduate out of the College of Engineering. I graduated out of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources with a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Studies. But here's the amazing thing. I had a 2-year internship with General Motors doing environmental engineering. And so see how that all came full circle, that although that's where I didn't think I would end up, lo and behold, I did. And it helped me get to the career path that I have now. And so whatever your interest is, whether it's like mine, something in the environment, although I couldn't pinpoint necessarily what it was, if it's the sports, if it's the arts, feel free to be into that, but do the research. You never know where those interests or where those passions can take you. And also don't be distracted or don't be, discouraged if others don't see the same vision, because sometimes our parents, our guardians, people in our family may not quite understand why we have the interests that we have or want to do the things that we have to do. But if you feel very strongly about it, do the research and see exactly where that career path can take you and stay the course. So all of that, I know it's a little bit long, but hopefully that resonates with somebody.
Definitely. And I think I'll ask Emily and just pose it slightly differently. So definitely, like, you know, talk about maybe what you might give yourself as a middle school student advice, but also, were there any specific role models that you saw? I think you talked about your dad maybe being in IT, but are there other role models that you followed?
Yeah, so for the advice question, this is going to sound weird, but hear me out. I would say that people are not smarter than you, they just have different context than you. So in my experience, every time you have a room of people who have the same experience in a field, in a subject, let's say math, if you teach them the same math concept in the same way and give everyone some time to work it out, pretty much everyone will be able to figure out the concept at roughly the same pace. Maybe they have to learn it in different ways, but they'll all kind of figure it out. The difference comes in when someone has more experience than the person next to them. Maybe the teacher just teaches in a way that they get better. So they just understand more of the concepts that have come before this. Maybe they come from a bit different school where things were covered earlier. Once you're in college, maybe you just played around with computers a lot as a kid, so you just know more about programming than the person next to you. Maybe they just study more than you do, but it's not that they're smarter than you, it's that they have more context than you. So there aren't, in my opinion, there are not like artsy people and science people, and those are the two kinds of people, and you can only be one. There are people who have found themselves to enjoy some aspect of art or science or both, and then they've put in the work to understand it, because all of those fields are hard work. So it's not that reading was easier for me and math would always be hard for me. It's that I spent more time reading because I liked it. And then eventually, when I got to calculus, I really put in the work to understand calculus, and I ended up liking it, which I never would have thought would have happened. So my advice to myself is, don't think of people as smarter than you. Think of how you can get the same context they have. And for role models, for your second question, my dad was definitely a role model. He's a really intelligent person who helped me figure out my way in life. And I can't think of anyone I find aspirational in the traditional way where I have their poster on my wall. But every single time I see a slightly older woman succeeding in STEM, doing something really cool, I go, oh, I love her so much. Every time every time I see a woman succeeding in STEM, it kind of makes my heart flutter a little bit. And that's what keeps me going, is seeing someone doing something incredible and thinking, oh, I could do even cooler things. I can keep trying and keep going further.
Yeah, I think that's very true, you know, and sometimes we have to be told. I remember when I was in ninth grade, my math teacher told me I wasn't good at math, which would, in a nice way, but I think she knew me that I would stand up and fix that. And that's what I did. And then I was very good at math and went on to, you know, become an engineer as well. I think we also are hearing from our students and those that are participating, they want to learn a little bit about how the pandemic has changed your job. You know, have you been able to work at home? I know right now, you know, in thinking about our future sort of work environment, a lot of emphasis is being placed on maybe can you work at home and be an engineer or be a scientist or be in STEM, and can you effectively do your job at home? So I'd love to start maybe with Tamara, if you can tell us a little bit about, you know, the in and out of home virtual workspace. How has that been?
It actually has been good. So aside from being an environmental scientist at the military base, I mentioned that I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of South Carolina. And so for the entire school year, we have mostly been online. And so while it's been a little bit challenging because you want to have that hands-on experience with your students, I've been able to teach about 5 different courses virtually. One of the things we do understand is that it can be a little bit challenging. I know we have some students in the chat that are in rural areas, and so maybe the internet or the Wi-Fi isn't as strong, or some students may not have the necessary resources. And so that has been a challenge. But overall, I've still been able to connect to the students as best as possible. For the work that I do at the military base, we just really have to social distance as best as possible. So I'm able to do a lot of the electronic work, such as being online, working with different files from my computer, but there has been those times where I have had to go on base and do the work. And right now, if you can see my background, I am actually in the library at at our military base. And so I've just really had to adapt and adjust. And so it's worked for the last year, but there has definitely been some challenges.
Great. How about you, Latia?
I agree. There definitely has been some challenges with working remotely. Thankfully, I do work with a company that we use technology a lot. So we just had to set up access and be able to network in through that effort. However, there are times when I do have to go to site because we are building. So some things I can't do remotely. Some conversations I have to have I have to have face-to-face, or some activities to observe. I have to be there to observe those activities. So you just try to be mindful, in my opinion, being mindful of your surroundings and who you are around, and controlling your own environment as much as possible. So actually coming in a couple of weeks, I will have to go to site for some activities. So it's a challenge, but we have to adapt and adjust as necessary.
What about you, Emily?
I would say for me, I'm working from home full time, and I would say it's actually leveled the playing field a little bit, because half of my team is in India. And before, we had this dynamic where the US developers all knew each other really well and had conversations that they knew about. And then the India half of the team kind of all had conversations that they were in the loop on. And then we would try to tell each other about those conversations for an hour every day in the meeting where we all work at the same time. But now, because we're all remote all the time, we're all forced to have conversations in maybe Slack where everyone can see all the conversations that have happened. We're forced to communicate in ways that include everyone, whether they're online or whether their Wi-Fi's out or whatever is happening. So it's actually made it easier for us to connect with people on the other side of the planet in a completely different time zone.
Yeah, so great. I mean, so I think, like you guys have brought up a lot of different aspects of your career and, how you got there a little bit. I think our audience wants to hear two things, I would think. Talk about how and if you searched out a mentor of sorts, different from a role model that you see, but someone who actually you worked with one-on-one. And then where were those sort of decision points, like when you were in high school or when you were in college, like how did you make those decisions to go forward with engineering or with environmental or whatever? Like what was that, what I want to say, like an inflection point of when that actually happened for you? So Tamara, if you want to go first.
Okay, so I shared the story about me switching from the College of Engineering to the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources. And I was fortunate enough to get involved with an organization called Minorities in Agriculture and Natural Resources. And so to be completely honest, in a lot of my undergraduate courses, I was probably the only African-American or person of color in my courses. And although I enjoyed them, it can be a little bit isolating to be the only one. And so in this particular organization, I had the opportunity to connect with other students of color who had the same type of interest, which was mind-boggling to me because I kind of felt that I was the only person, only Black woman or young girl who was interested in the environment. And so to the question of who ended up being my mentors, it was actually those professors that was in the organization. Here were other PhDs who were, their backgrounds was in animal science or dietary science or crop and soil science. And so that really showed me that I could have a vital career in this path. And they also inspired me to take my education as far as possible. So I knew I loved going to school, but seeing them in that position was really great. That was on in school. I would say in my career path now, I'm just really inspired by the people who are in my field. And I mentioned to someone in the chat that one of the biggest role models that I see on the national stage is Lisa P. Jackson. She was the first African-American woman to be the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. And so to see her to excel at that level, not that that's the position that I would want, but it was just good to see that representation on a larger scale. So I've gotten it in a couple of different areas.
Great, thank you. And I know some people are leaving because they have to change classes and all. So thank you for everybody that has joined. We're gonna still be on for about 8 more minutes, but want to make sure I thank everybody that joined, teachers that joined. If there are specific needs, we'll definitely follow up by email, but wanted to thank everybody. So Latia, do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of that and a mentor of sorts?
Sure. So in growing up, I didn't know any engineers. And it wasn't until I met one gentleman who was an aerospace engineer. He worked at NASA, and he just ended up being a family friend. And my parents told him what I was thinking or what I was doing, because my parents had no clue what I was doing. They were just like, let her go. Keep doing whatever you're doing, just keep doing it, because we don't have a clue. And so he eventually told me that it was electrical engineering is where my interest tends to be. So he informed me of that. But I'll tell you, that was the nerdiest man I had ever met in my life up to that point. And so he came down, I was at his house, and he came down with thermodynamic books and all sorts of stuff. And I might have been a freshman in high school, and I was just like, okay, yeah, I'm not looking at all of that. But he was the one that told me. So from there, he was just kind of on the sidelines of pushing me. But again, I kind of kept my distance because his level of nerdiness was just too much for me. But when I went away to college and I found out how hard it was, and especially with the school that I chose and the curriculum that I chose and the amount of credits I had to take pretty much 18 to 21 credits in a semester in order to graduate on time, because basically I was in school for half the year and I worked half the year. That's the way the program was set up. So every 3 months I switched from work to school, and it was a 5-year program. So I became a bug in a tutoring lab. And I found a tutor that was pretty down to earth, but this guy was a genius. He was a genius. I found two tutors that were geniuses, whereas and they were guys, but I kind of modeled myself after them. I wanted to be like them because the one gentleman, he literally sat in a classroom with a Mountain Dew bottle and just absorbed information. I never saw a guy take notes. But he would just absorb information and drink his Mountain Dew and just ask questions. He was just, his level, he was just a genius.
Very good.
To the point that sometimes when I would do my homework and I'm in the tutoring lab, I just want to sit next to you because I felt like his brain waves were helping me. So I found two great tutors while I was in school that I gleaned from and that I was able to learn from because I wasn't, most of the school people I went to school with, in my opinion, they were bred to be engineers. I was not bred to be an engineer. And so I had some space to catch up. I had a learning curve to catch up with the rest of my peers. And they helped me catch on quickly because they were able to explain things in a very simplistic way that I could catch on to. And I'm so very grateful for that because I learned how to study. I didn't study in high school, but I learned how to study in college. And I learned how to just basically keep trying and how to figure out, I learned the system in college. I learned how to absorb what doesn't come easy to me.
Yeah.
So I was very grateful for that. And there was one gentleman that I pursued as a mentor at Westinghouse. This one gentleman I met, and again, I just loved his brain. I loved the way he thought, to the point that after I met him, after the first time I met him, I saw him in a meeting and how his thought pattern so enlightened me compared to some of the other managers that I met, that I went to him after the meeting and asked him to mentor me. And I said, do you mind if I come to you with questions? Because I was coming from the automotive industry now into the energy sector, which was completely different. And I had another quick learning curve to get caught up on, because guess what? I was writing contracts. I was negotiating contracts, and I didn't see anything in my resume that said I was qualified to do that, but that was my role. And so I needed to catch on quickly, and he was great for that.
Thank you so much. Okay, Emily, wrap us up with maybe a little bit of your story around a mentor.
Yeah, my story is that when I graduated from college, I almost quit computer science. I had been graduating. I've been trying to get to the point where I was good enough to produce something useful to people. I had internships, and I felt like I couldn't get over this learning curve. And I thought maybe it just isn't my thing. Maybe I just should become a communicator or a science communicator or something. I don't know. Programming, I'm not built for it. But I got my first job in programming anyway. Here's a good career tip. When you get a job offer, don't ask your future manager, are you sure? Which is what I did. Say anything else except that. And then I was so lucky to get onto a team that let me program with them 8 hours a day. I sat down next to them and watched what they were doing, and they would pass me the keyboard and I would type some and they would type some. And I did that for a few months. And by the end of the few months, my life was changed. My career path was changed. I'm going to do this for a lot more time.
Wonderful. Yeah, so great. So I think we really appreciate all of you and your excellent stories that you guys have shared today. I know we're running up on the 1 o'clock. I just do want to add one note. When you talk about finding somebody smarter than you in your class and then being with them, the other thing I did is I married that guy. And so, yes, he was very good at schoolwork. He tutored me, but I've been cooking and running a business and working with him for the last 38 years. So, you know what? That can also be a great way to find someone that you might want to spend your life with. So as we get ready to wrap up, I just wanted a couple of things. Thank you again to that amazing group of speakers, Representative Davis and Latia and Tamara and Emily, you were amazing. I do want to remind you that Learning Blade is a way, particularly for middle school students, to find out a lot about different careers. We have 100 different careers and technologies in the system. So if you have an account, I encourage you to go in there and take a look. We've got all the careers that were talked about today, environmental and computer science, as well as electrical. So you can do that as well. And also, if you're interested, particularly for teachers, tomorrow, we are going to be again doing another event with the South Carolina STEM Coalition for STEM Education Month, a project-based learning and 3D printing time for teachers to learn a little bit about how to utilize 3D printers and how to use project-based learning to really help students understand the active sort of engagement in engineering. And I want to give a shout out to Flash Forge, which is a 3D printing company that actually sponsors some 3D printers for some of our Learning Blade clients and provides them to those schools that finish a lot of lessons. So if you are interested in that, you can find out more info. And yes, and here we go. And in South Carolina alone, the school that finishes the most Learning Blade lessons during the month by April 11th is going to win a free FlashForge 3D printer. So get busy on that as well. And again, thank you so much for joining us. If you want more information on Learning Blade, you can email info@learningblade.com. If you want more information on Million Mentor States at millionmentors.com. And we thank again these amazing panelists. Your stories are inspiring. Hopefully kids that were on today got a little nugget of advice and things that they can get from your amazing stories. And again, thank you so much. I want to shout out to Joshua Snyderman, my vice president. This was his entire idea to do this webinar. It worked out really well. And thank you to Kirby Johnson on our team who helped with the logistics today. So have a wonderful rest of the day. And again, make it count. You can, if you see it, you can be it. So go out there and find something that you enjoy. Thanks again.